thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to address you guys. My goal here today is just to give you an idea why I think a worldview without a God in it is a reasonable position to hold.
Could you talk a little louder?
Yeah, I'll try. I'd like to begin with this quote by Stephen Roberts. It's one of my favorite on the subject of atheism, and he says that I contend we're both atheists. I just believe in one fewer God than you do. When you understand why you dismiss all other possible gods, you'll understand why I dismiss yours. And so atheism or non-belief is a little bit different than a lot of the other presentations you probably had so far, in that atheism is something that just about everybody can understand on some level, because in a way you're all atheists when it comes to other people's gods. You know, I could list off 2,000 gods that have been invented by men over the course of our history, and I bet I could find that about 99.9% of them nobody in this room believes in anymore. So in a sense, you are all the same as atheists. We just go one God further. How atheists are viewed? Well, 45%, these are some recent polls of Americans, 45% said they wouldn't vote for an atheist as president. George Bush didn't think atheists should be considered citizens. That was the first Bush. 48% would disapprove of their daughter marrying an atheist, and 40% believe atheists don't share their view of society. So, which leads me to the real reason that I became an atheist, and that's because babies are just so darn tasty. Just kidding. I have 3 children of my own, and I've almost never considered consuming them. So a little bit of my background. Like I said, I have 3 children. They're aged 5, 3, and 2. I've been married 8 years. I enjoy playing Xbox, and last night I watched The Walking Dead on my TiVo, which, by the way, I don't know if many of you Christians are aware, there is a zombie horde in the Bible. It's Matthew 27:52. You might want to look it up. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, so my background is I was baptized and confirmed as a Lutheran. Being separated during my college from my home church, I just kind of stopped going to church for a couple years, and kind of a church sabbatical, as you were. And during that time, without that weekly reinforcement, it allowed some skepticism and doubts to kind of come into my mind, and which caused me to read more of the Bibles. I started looking into sites like skepticsannotatedbible.com, which is a great resource. And I just started to see over time all the misogyny, genocide, inconsistencies with history and science, contradictions, immorality that was in this book that up until then I thought was the divine inspired word of an infallible God. So this led me to question my faith even more, and I've heard this time and time again from atheists that the best way to make an atheist is to have a religious person read their holy text. Most Christians actually haven't read more of the Bible than the verses their pastors have pointed out to them. So over the course of 2 years, I went from a position where I was a very devout Christian to where I was actually comfortable wearing the title of atheist. It's not something you just wake up and decide one day. So I've been an atheist now over 10 years. In 2008, I co-founded the La Crosse Area Free Thought Society with another member, and we now have over 125 people in it. And for about the past year or so, we've been writing monthly columns in the La Crosse Tribune called A Free Thinker's Perspective. Our mission statement, I guess I should mention that as well, is the purpose of our group is to promote positive free thought, the separation of church and state, and the application of science and reason to human understanding. So just a couple definition of terms. I think a lot of people have misconceptions about what atheism is, what agnosticism is. Depending on who you talk to, you might get different ideas, but these are the predominant definitions I see being used today in the community of free thinkers, as you would call them perhaps. Atheism addresses belief. It's a lack of a belief in a deity, whereas agnosticism addresses knowledge, whether you feel a thing is knowable or not. So really there are two separate things. Theism addresses belief, Gnosticism, the root word is knowledge. And so really you have a combination of four things that a person could fall under. You know, me, and along with most atheists I know, would fall under the category of an agnostic atheist. The majority, I think, of atheists are that, in which they lack a belief in a God, but they don't claim to know for sure that God doesn't exist. I think a lot of people mistakenly think anyone who calls themselves an atheist is somehow dogmatically asserting that it's absolutely 100% impossible for any God to exist anywhere. That's really not the case. There could be a subset of atheists who are like that, but that's very few. That would be under maybe the category of Gnostic atheist at the bottom, where they feel they know for a fact there is no God. And to be honest, I don't think I've met anyone like that. Burden of proof is important. Who bears the burden of proof when making a claim? The theist is the one making the claim, in this case, that there exists a God. And I like to use the court system because I think a lot of people are familiar with it. So for my examples, I'll be using a guilty verdict as a belief in a God, and a not guilty verdict as lacking a belief in a God. So, like I said, many people think the options are you either believe a God exists or you believe a God does not exist, and that's actually not accurate. It's either you believe God exists or you're unconvinced of that claim that a God exists. So you could either positively believe that there's no God or just don't know, like I said before. So it's really a lack of a belief. In a court, the jury rules either guilty or not guilty. So you have someone who's being accused of a crime. Say the police arrest you and they accuse you of murder. They're the ones positing a claim. They're saying you committed a crime, and now they have to present evidence to support that claim. It's not the other way around. It's not you coming into trial and having to somehow prove your innocence against their claim. The person making the claim bears the burden of proof. In our country, like I said, we have innocent until proven guilty, which just basically means until they present their case and they present enough evidence to support that claim, then, and unless they do meet their claim, then the default position is to rule not guilty. Just like in a traffic violation, they don't require as much evidence to convict as, for instance, a murder. You have a lot higher burden of proof because the claim is so much greater. And I think this was pointed out well by Carl Sagan, who, a great book I think everyone should read is The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. It's really almost a textbook for skepticism, but he made the statement that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Just like in a murder trial, they need to present more evidence than in a traffic violation trial. And the claim that a theist might make that a transcendent, all-present, disembodied mind that is all-powerful, all-knowing, possesses human emotion, and exists out of space and time, it's a pretty big claim, and I think as a society we should expect pretty big evidence to back it up. So what's the atheist burden of proof? Well, like I said, atheists generally aren't making a positive claim that we're not saying there is no God. We're just saying we're not accepting the proposition that the claim that you're making. Atheism isn't selling anything. We're just not buying what the other guys are selling. So there's no burden of proof to lack of belief. I just want to touch briefly on Russell's teapot. Bertrand Russell was a gentleman who lived from 1872 to 1970, wrote a lot of great things. And his kind of contribution to this whole burden of proof issue was, his statement was, if I were to suggest that between Earth and Mars there is a china teapot revolving around the sun in an elliptical orbit, nobody would be able to disprove my assertion, provided I were careful to add that the teapot is too small to be revealed by even our most powerful telescope. But if I were to go on to say that since my assertion cannot be disproved, it is an intolerable presumption on the part of human reason to doubt it, I should rightly be thought to be talking nonsense. If, however, the existence of such a teapot were affirmed in ancient books, taught as sacred truth every Sunday, and instilled into the minds of children at school, hesitation to believe in its existence would become a mark of eccentricity and entitle the doubter to the attentions of the psychiatrist in an enlightened age or of the inquisitor in an earlier time. So he's basically making a fancy way of saying that just because you can't disprove something doesn't lend any credence to it. For instance, nobody's expecting anyone here to provide evidence that unicorns or pixies or leprechauns do not exist. Again, if anyone wants to make a claim they do exist, then they have to provide that evidence.